got dreams of reaching. I'm a frisbee king.
What's up, disc golf people? This is Jacked Up with School of Disc Golf and Team Infinite, and today I've got a comparison video mapping out 4 top players side by side, and we're going to hopefully learn a few things by looking at what they have in common and really what all competent players have in common, and the areas where they vary and the reasons why they vary, because it's usually based on a decision. So let's get started. We're going to start by looking at the similarities, because if all the good players are doing something the same, then it's a pretty good indicator that that's the only sensible way to do it, or at least that's where the percentages lie. And the first thing we're going to look at here is the eyeballs. With all 4 of these guys, I want you to notice how the eyes are ahead, and the entire time I'm going to run this through all the way through once. It's full speed, and then it's about 1/3 speed. So take a look and watch where everybody's head's at in both of these cases. Eyes forward, eyes are barely turned, and then the eyes are back on the target. Super, super important. Let's rewind this a little bit, and you can see what I'm talking about. One thing you're going to notice that these guys are not doing as they turn their heads, or as they get into position to throw and turn their bodies, you can kind of see with Ricky about how he's working hard in order to keep that head. It's probably touching his chin's probably touching his right shoulder, and he's working hard to keep that head as still as possible, because what he wants is he wants his eyes to be away from the target for the fewest amount of time necessary, and he also wants to be able to have it steady when he comes ripping through. He wants to be able to have that eye planted on the target. And basically, if you do that and you're balanced on your line, that disc is more or less going to go in the direction that you were planning on it to go. Same thing with the other guys. They're not looking down at their feet to see where their feet are placed. They're not looking at the disc for whatever reason. Somebody might think that looking at their disc can help them. And very importantly, as they turn their shoulders away and their torso away from the target, they're not just letting their head go where their shoulders go. If they did that, when you get to this point, you would see 4 heads that are facing in the direction of the hand holding the disc. And you don't see that. You see 4 heads that are at least 90 degrees already rotated towards the target so that they can get towards the target. And then if we take it all the way towards the end, this is the biggie here. This is why it matters. If we let it play, all 4 of these guys, by the end of their throw, they're standing right where they threw from, and their head is able to stay locked on the target throughout the release. That's a big time similarity. So if you're not doing some version of that, just experiment a little bit and see how things might change if you're putting a little bit more priority on having your eyes on the target as much as possible. All right, so the next similarity that I see here is if we watch from the very beginning of the drive, these guys all, and we're going to get to the differences in a minute, but if you watch them throughout this drive, however they do their footwork, at every point, their torso is more or less in between their 2 feet. So they're not having to go reach back and tilt their body back and then feel like they have to throw that body forward as part of the throw. They know that the power is not really coming from just how fast can you fly up the tee pad and then somehow release the disc. They know that balance and timing and using the proper muscles has a lot to do with it. They know that when they get into the spot where they can throw, that it's really going to be about, it's really going to be about in this particular spot once they're there. And the timing's off a little bit, so you see Ricky's a little bit forward. That's my fault. That's just me not being able to sync it up perfectly. But notice how in each of these cases, these guys are pretty much straight up and down with the torso, posture-wise. Isaac, you'd have to go a little bit further to get to that point, right about here. So they realize that in order to get into that position, any kind of footwork that they're doing they have to start in that position. When I say position, I mean that balance, so that they're not, so that when they arrive, they don't have to do a lot of work. They're already in that central position, because when they get there, and Paul, you can really see if you look closely the way he's got his knees buckled in. It's basically like a figure skater or a diver who's collapsing everything in for the most efficient grounding and centrifugal force, and he's not focused on this at this point. He is solely focused on, let's see, where is it? There we go. The rotation of the torso without moving forward. He's going to spend some time, like they all are. They're all going to spend some time actually staying in that spot as they execute what I call the nucleus of the throw, and it's really the essence of your entire throw. 90% of your power comes from the nucleus, and if you're don't have good balance and timing during your nucleus, you're not going to get the consistency and the accuracy that you're looking for, because your body's going to be flailing in all different directions trying to catch up to where it's supposed to be, or it's going to be ahead of itself, timing wise, and trying to fix it at the very end and hold back. It's much better to drift and make sure. When people ask me about footwork, I always talk about the torso when I say your footwork. Your feet should basically accommodate your torso being stable and in the most sturdy position when it actually comes time to throw. So that's thing number two. You watch these guys, they're walking through and they're making sure that any footwork that they employ um, has something to do with being, or I should say, the priority with any footwork they employ um, is to land up in the exact right position so that they can execute a backhand drive properly using their hips and their core and their back, instead of just trying to run with your feet and then fling with your arm. It's entirely different than that, honestly. So now let's talk a little bit about the differences. And the main one that I see here, one of them is just sort of a preference for the way they like to throw, and we'll get to that. But the main one that I see here is if we go back, and we go all the way back to the beginning here when we have the full speed. Let's see if we have to shrink this down a hair. There we go. So you can see Anthony and Isaac in the very end there. And the main difference is, and I had to sync this up or else the young guys, two guys on the left, Isaac Robinson and Anthony Barella, they're basically they're using their youth, and they're launching off of the back of that tee pad, and most of their throw is all about how fast can I get my arm speed, because a fast arm speed results in that disc getting out there in a hurry. You got your old heads on the right, however, and whether it's that they threw, most likely they did throw like that once upon a time and maybe not that long ago, but they've also probably, after thousands and tens of thousands of throws and being on the road for a decade or more, they've probably also started to understand that if maybe they can't go as fast as they used to anyway, but they might understand that the hard part, it's not just all about how fast can you go, it's how fast can you go and then stop to execute that nucleus. So you see, I'm going to let it run here, and you'll see that Anthony in particular is really just taken off. And the result of this, I'm sure if we had the tech disc running, you would see that the result of it is the younger guys getting more arm speed. But what I'm really interested in is if you watch Paul in particular, and Ricky as well, this is the beginning of the nucleus, or more or less for all four of these guys. And if I roll this through and let it go a third time, a third of the time, so you get to right about here, they're all still behind, they're at the end of the tee pad, and Paul and Ricky are making an effort to actually hold their place right where they release the disc from. So in other words, they're trying to make a minimum amount of advancement from where they might have executed the nucleus here, um, forward. In Paul's case, he's trying to halt right there. And what that does is not only does that give you supreme control when your body is as still as possible within the space. I mean, it's still doing all this powerful rotational, employing this rotational force. But basically, if you notice in both Anthony's case and Isaac's case, they're kind of walking or a little bit flying past. I mean, Anthony's in control okay, but if you notice the difference with Paul down there, he's staying completely behind his mark. And where spin comes from, it's how fast are you getting that hand forward and putting spin on it, and then how cleanly are you halting your body at the exact same moment or as close to it as possible as when the disc comes out, because that is going to give you the cleanest snap as opposed to a hand, because your body's moving. If you have a hand that's moving forward a little bit as you release it, it's going to take some of the sharpness out of that. And so Paul and Ricky have probably realized that if they try to match the speed and explosiveness of the guys who are 10 or 15 years younger than them, much more often the disc is not going to go where they want it to, resulting in bogeys or worse. But they've also understood, these guys have thrown so many throws, in the back of their mind or in the front of their mind maybe, they have an acute understanding of how to mix the angle of the disc and how to mix the spin speed ratio to get that disc to fly flat as long as they need it to, and to get that disc to finally fade when they need it to, or even to turn a little bit and fade. And if you look at Ricky, this is the last thing I wanted to show you about the differences. It's all a matter of preference. But if we get right to this point where they're doing the reach back, you see Anthony up there with he's holding the disc on a high plane, and it's very, very flat. Ricky's holding the disc on a high plane. Let's see here. Ricky's holding the disc on a high plane, but he's got more of a downward angle, and then he's going to snap that thing back up, probably get some extra launch. He might be putting hyzer on it and what we call working the disc. Paul is doing something similar to what Anthony's doing, except for he has it on a slightly lower plane, and he's pulling it straight through, and you watch the follow through. It's a little bit high, but pretty flat. See the difference in Anthony's follow through? Anthony is taking a disc that he knows he can muscle, and he's just muscling it, and he's trying to throw it as flat as he can and keep it going as straight as he can, and then it'll fade in the end. Ricky, most likely on this throw, I can't remember what the outcome was, but Ricky most likely is trying to work the disc a little bit more. He's probably throwing something that he can start off with a little bit of hyzer and launch angle, get to turn over, and then before it hits the ground, fade back to the middle, maybe buying himself a little extra distance. That's what us old guys do. So maybe he's getting ready for that. I'm not sure. So in any case, you have a few things here that they do the same, and you have a few things that they do differently. And my goal when I work with the large majority of my clients is not to say, hey, this is the way Anthony Barlela throws, so why don't you do exactly the same and you'll be throwing 75 miles an hour. It is the reason I have the four here is we're talking about the generalities, the universalities of the form that everybody should have in their game. And understanding that you don't have to do it exactly like them, you just have to understand the essence of what they're doing, which is it's all about balance, it's about timing, and then it's about employing the correct muscles of the body, and of course, eye contact. So a lot of times getting better is simply understanding what it is you're really trying to do, as opposed to, just running real fast down the tee pad and then figuring out how to launch it when you get to the end of the tee pad. This isn't so much throwing a javelin. It's a little bit different than that. So hope that helps some. Hit me up if you want to work together or if you have any questions.
I got these